There are different ways that you can zone quilt depending on where you want to start on your quilt or the quilt type that you have. Have you been wanting a machine quilting frame but just don't have a lot of space? Or maybe you've been wondering, what is zone quilting? Hi, I'm Angelique, and in today's product support video, I'm going to be talking all about hoop framing and zone quilting. We have 4 different machine hoop style frames to choose from. We have our beginner friendly mini quilter. We have the Cutie tabletop frame. We have the Evolution hoop frame, and we have our Q-Zone hoop frame. I'm going to be working on the Q-Zone hoop frame, but pretty much everything that I show you works on all of our hoop frames. So what is a hoop frame? Well, a hoop frame is a way to help you manage your fabric without the footprint that a larger rolling frame does. So it allows you to basically do any size quilt in a much smaller area through something that we call zone quilting. The hoop frame, instead of having a rolling bar, you just clamp into the different areas and you sew that particular area. As such, there are some different ways that you want to prepare your quilt sandwich. So let's move over to the table and talk about that now. Making a quilt sandwich for a hoop frame is pretty much the same regardless of the size of your frame or the size of your quilt. If you want to know more about all of the steps of putting a quilt sandwich together, please check out the video on the Mini Quilter Part 2 where I do talk about making your quilt sandwich for loading. The only difference is that if you have a larger style frame like the Q-Zone I'm using or the Evolution, we recommend 10 inches instead of 8 inches of extra batting and backing. I always like to start with pin basting, which I do show in that video as well, and then I often like to sew baste. And that's actually what I did here, which I have pre-prepared. After I pin basted and got everything together, I took it to my little Rebel and I just made sure to sew really close to the edge all the way along the top. It's just going to make it easier for me when I go to take it to the frame. And you can sew down the sides as well. I did one side, but I find that this is usually an area I'm going to have to unpick pretty quickly into the process. So most of the time I will just sew the top and just pin baste the sides because I know I'm going to have to smooth this out as I go. Sometimes there's just not enough extra fabric for the batting and backing depending on the size of your quilt. So having that 10 or 8 inches that I mentioned is just really not feasible. And that's where the optional leaders come in. So I have on here pre-started the optional leaders. You're still going to need some space, so you need a good couple of inches. I've got plenty here so that when I do get this on the frame, I will be able to start quilting at the top. If I put my leader on way too close to this, then I'm still not able to get my top quilted. You can pin these down using straight pins or quilting pins like I like to use because I always poke myself when I use straight pins. And I'm going to show you how to go ahead and put your leader on. With a hoop frame, it's much easier to put your leader on your quilt and take it over that way versus a rolling frame in which you can pin it actually at the frame. So you want to get it as straight as possible, and you want to do it just the same way that you would do if you had a rolling frame. When you put your leader on, you want to find the center of your leader and the center of your quilt. Now I've already done all of that. It's just going to make it easier as you're moving, and you don't want to cut your hoop frame leaders because you're going to do various sizes of quilts, and that's why it's best to leave it in the full size that it is. So as you can see, you're just going to basically make sure that it's smoothed and straight, and you want to make sure to pin through the layers. For this one, I just have the backing. It will be fine, but if you had your layer of batting all the way to the top there, then you would also add that. And you're just every few inches going to add your pin. Right, and I'm going to need one more pin, so I'll finish that up, and then it's ready to take to the frame. Loading your hoop frame takes a little bit more forethought as to where you want to load it to get started. So one of the first things that you want to do is get an idea of where your area is in terms of where the start point for quilting would be. So what you want to do is you want to take your machine, you want to move it back and all the way to the left. And then you want to move it forward so you can see, are your wheels or anything going to run into the side? And so here I've got a run in, so I'm going to bring it over to the right a little bit. And so now I know that for my left side, my needles here, I need it to be about here. And so what I've learned on this frame, that I am pretty close to the furthest elastic clip that we have here, is a good thing. One of the other things you can do is mark your clamps. That will also help you remember where to get started. So now I know where I want to get started. I'm just going to go ahead and move this out of the way, and you want to take off all of your clamps. All right, so I'm going to start, because I do have this rope that's part of the leaders, as kind of starting and tucking this through, because it obviously won't go underneath your hopping foot, and then carefully tucking my fabric quilt sandwich and everything underneath that so it doesn't get caught. And I'm just going to carefully pull this direction. Again, remembering about where I need to be, and I can always move my machine to make sure where I need to be. So this is a pretty good starting place for me. So I'm going to try to kind of remember where I am here. Now I need to think about the top part where I want to get started on my zone. And so you usually need a good 1.5 inches from the take-up bar that you have from the top of your quilt sandwich. So I'm going to move this first one up so I can kind of move. This is all the way, so I want to make sure I'm out a little bit, and then I know I'm going to have plenty of room to get started. So that's looking pretty good that way. All right, so once I've got it pretty nailed in, I want to put my first clamp on. Take-up rail clamps on this one have a little hook area for your bungees, very similar to the mini quilter as well, have those kind of bungees. So you want to make sure that this is facing you or facing in. So once I get this where I want it to be, I'm going to clamp that first one down. So that first one's going to be the most important for me to get started. All right, and now I just want to make sure as I put the other top ones on that the rest of my quilt is straight. So I'll do my center one next, and I want to make sure that this is nice and flat as well. All right, so that's pretty good. So now I want to roll up the excess. In this case, my excess is going to be my leader. So I'm going to just move my machine a little bit forward to get it out of the way. And the rope in here is just going to help you roll this. And I can just set that to the side. And now I'm ready to use the elastic and take this around and clip that on to the edge. And you're going to do the same thing if it's just your excess quilt, whatever excess material you have, just so that it's out of the way. If you don't do this, then when you go to move your machine and you're doing your free motion, it's going to cause drag and you're not going to love your design. Another thing with these is they come with these little plastic parts here so that you can tuck the straps out of your way, because you don't want to cause these to drag as well. So that's one way you can do those. I find that a little time consuming. I just don't have the best luck. So I like to use our little mini clips. This is a faster little cheat where I can just tuck these up, because really all I want to do is just keep them from getting caught underneath, and it'll give a little bit more support to my roll. Our mini clips come in 2 sizes. They come 1.5 inches, which are the small blue ones, up to 2 inches as your roll gets bigger. And I just find them a great way to be able to manage fabric or store fabric in between. So I highly recommend those as well. Now, if you're using a different hoop frame, like you're using our cutie hoop frame, the management system for the take-up rail is a little bit different. Instead, you have this little loop here the coil, and so you have it this way on that frame, and then your excess gets clipped around this. But this is what's going to help maintain that for you. If you're using the Evolution hoop frame, these are the clamps that come with that. It has this little attachment here, so your excess fabric or whatever goes in that, and then this just sits on top of it and keeps it out of the way. So that's just a little bit differences in how those work in our other hoop type frames. Next, we want to add our front rail clamps. So we are floating, so that means we just have the excess going over the top here. And though I have basted here, I want to make sure that all my layers that are going over the front bar are nice and smooth. So I can reach underneath and just make sure that my backing is smooth, and then I'll just move my machine out of the way, and I'm just going to use this to get my top nice and smooth as well, and then I'm just going to clamp down. Notice that I'm pulling a little bit, and I'm feeling to make sure everything is nice. And if I want a little extra, I could also use one of those clamps right there for the space that's in the center. Next, I want to put on my side clamps. So on this side, I have plenty of excess, so I'm going to pull this down a little bit. Again, make sure that it's nice and smooth, and clamp that on. On this side, I don't. So there's two different things that I can do. I can use the bungees that do come with your frame, and you would just simply put these upside down and attach the bungees, but I want to show you using the leaders. The leaders come with the front and one for the bottom. I won't be using the bottom because I have plenty of fabric, so you do have it for the top and the bottom, and they have short ones for the sides. So it comes with two for the sides because you only need a little bit that you have to clip at a time. So you're simply going to take this, you're going to lay it over on the side so that it's going to overlap. And then you're just going to pin it down just like we pinned down the top one. And if you need to move your machine, feel free to do so. I'm going to go through all of the layers that I have. And so if this was a part of your quilt, you would just drape this over and clamp that down. So we're just going to clamp that down. All right. I like to peek. I'm a peeker. So I will peek underneath and just make sure that everything is nice and straight. And if I do need to do a few little pulls, I can. And I also want to check my tension. We are not making a trampoline, right? So that's something that when you're doing a hoop style frame, it's not going to be as tight as a rolling frame. You need that little bit of give in there, and so there's a couple things you can do. We talk about the penny test. I don't have a penny on me, so I will just do the finger test. So basically, poke your finger, and if you can grab the tip, you're good. It's going to have a little bounce, but I don't want it to be so tight that it's going to cause tension issues. It's going to cause thread breakage, stuff like that. So that's why you want to be there. One of the things I like about a hoop frame is that if I did get it a little too tight, I can always just pull down a little bit here and get it to loosen up a little bit because of the way it's clamped on. Okay, so we're pretty much at this point ready to quilt. But before we do that, we need to know how much space do we have to actually quilt. So you have in the features something that's called toolbox and something that's called measure. And so I'm going to get this up as far as I can go, remembering where I'm going to catch stuff. And I'm going to reset my origin. And then I can measure down. And I get just under 13 inches of quilting space with the 16. So now I know exactly how much space that I have with my roll coming towards me, all right? I can do the same thing going to the right, and I'm going to take it over. And now I know how much space I have that way, which is a little over 37 inches. This is going to be important for when we get to start thinking about how do we want to quilt this based on the zones. Another great feature is the edge warning. It's again in the toolbox. So I'll go to the edge warning and I can set those same locations where my actual quilt is. As far as I can quilt up this way. So I will set that and I will set it in the bottom, and then it will tell me, which is really, really helpful for when I'm quilting on a hoop. So if you are thinking about a hoop frame and one of our machines, I highly recommend getting one of the Elites because you do have that edge warning in there. It's just gonna make it a much easier experience because you'll know exactly where you need to stop on that. Maybe you're not quite ready for that. You're like, I have a domestic machine I want to use. It has a throat space of at least 8 inches. How can I do that if I don't have that feature? Well, you just have your measuring tape and you would do the same thing, find out where your edges are and get an idea. Like I said, you can mark on your different places with some tape or a pen, it's yours, and then you'll know exactly, okay, this is where I need to stop. So that's getting it all loaded. Let's go to the table and I want to show you some diagrams on zone quilting because there are different ways that you can zone quilt depending on where you want to start on your quilt or the quilt type that you have. Now we want to talk about how many zones that we're going to need probably to quilt this, and to do that we're going to need to know the size of our quilt. So the quilt I've made today is 57 inches in width to about 67 inches in length. So when I took the quilt area size that I had and divided that in, it's going to take me about 10 zones in order to quilt this. So let me show you some diagrams of some different suggestions for how you would do zone quilting depending on the type of designs or the type of quilt that you have. So our first one here is if we're doing an all over meandering type of design. So this is how I've loaded the quilt. So our first zone here, the top left, I'm going to have a larger quilting area for my first zone than my second zone because that's what's going to be left over. So I would start quilting over here and then I could go to B. And then C is going to be the next row that I have to quilt. I can leave my needle down, move it up, and then I can quilt going back through D. And then again, same thing as I go to E, leave my needle down, move my quilt up, and quilt here. And then of course, every time I get to one of these lines, I'm shifting the quilt left or right. And we're going to show you actually how to do that. The next one is an idea if you're doing something like a pantograph where you're going to be starting from the left every time. Or maybe you're doing like horizontal lines where it's just better for the machine if you work from left to right. So again, we load here in A where we have our longer space. We follow whatever our pantograph design is or our straight lines. And then when we get to section B, this is when we're going to shift our quilt. And then we continue that design over there, whether it be the pantograph or the lines. If you are doing something like horizontal lines, then you would stop, maybe make a little marking with an erasable pen, fasten off your threads, so do a few of those stitches to really lock them in, cut off your threads, and then move to the next area that you want to do there. The next one I have in this diagram is about what if the design I'm doing is more vertical. Starting up in the left corner, I would then work this way, and then as I run into my space here, I'm going to move my quilt all the way down first, and then when I'm ready to start what's left of my quilt, which I have here marked as F, I'll then go back to the top and move it to the new quilting area, and then again start here and work my way down. So that works very well for different types of vertical designs that you may want to do on your quilt. And then the last one I have here is, what if I have something that has a very center focused look to the quilt? I may actually want to start in the center. So this is where I actually have my first quilt zone. So I'm not going to use necessarily my whole quiltable area because I want my design to be consistently down the center. And so you want to work from the center out. So I would load my quilt in the center and then smooth out working to B and then C, and then come back and maybe do D and E. And then, okay, I want to move on to the center left side or the center right side. And again, I'm going to move up and down. Keeping that in mind, you may want to choose not to do any sew basting because it's going to be difficult to know when to remove that and may cause you some issues. So pin basting is probably your best option, so you can take those pins out as you go. Just be really careful when you're quilting that you don't sew over your pins. Now that we know which style that we're going to do, which is going to be the all over meander, we're ready to head back to the machine and double check that everything is ready to go. I'm back at the frame, so now I want to do some last minute checks before I actually start stitching. One of the first things I want to do is make sure that all my cords are free to move and I don't get any drag. So I'm just going to move my machine back and forth and around and make sure that all those cords are nice and not caught in anything. And so I'm not having any issues there. The next thing I also want to do is I want to check the height of my take-up rail to my machine. Right now it's a little high, as you can see. I can get my whole hand in there and move that around, and I only want to be able to just get my fingers underneath there. So adjust that. All of our hoop frames come with an option to do so. And make sure your frame height is the same on both sides. And then just do another double check that you still have movement. You do need to be able to easily move. You don't want to create any drag. If you are using a ruler base, you'd have to have a little bit higher for the ruler base. So those are just some things to think about when you set your height. If you're using a domestic machine, you want to make sure your feed dogs are down and that you have also made sure that your foot is down, or you're going to get issues with tension. So when you are ready to get started, you are going to bring up your bobbin. So a nice single stitch, we'll get a hold of that, pull that up and hold it. Go ahead and drop your needle, and now you're ready to get started quilting. And so I'm going to quilt in my first zone. Once I finish my first zone, I'm going to show you how to move to that zone B. So we're starting in zone A. I basically have finished zone A. I'm now ready to move to zone B. So we're going to leave the needle down and we're just going to move our quilt this way. The best way to do that is we're going to remove the side and front clamps. We're going to remove our minis here from the back, and we are going to undo all of our elastic, and then we are going to remove the first two, leaving the other one down. Okay, so this is going to help us maintain our straightness, and we're going to carefully pull our quilt. We don't want to be too rough with it because we don't want to damage the needle, but this is going to help us get right where we were. Can move just a smidgen more, and pretty confident that what's left here is easily going to be in my quiltable area. Now I'm going to go ahead and put my back clips back on, roll up my excess, tuck in my straps or use my mini clips. We then do the front, and we'll add our leader to the other side, and we're ready to get started again. Now when I get started, after moving it, I like to let it take a couple of stitches. All right, so I've pretty much finished zone B. I'm now ready to move on to zone C, which is going to be right below this one. So it's very similar to when I moved from left to right, only now I'm going forward, and so I'm going to need to remove all of my clamps. So just like before, I left my needle down. And so I know where I want to get started, and this is also going to help me make sure that I only move the quilt where I need to. So I can move forward, and notice that I'm using my machine to help me. And if I want to, I can go ahead and move this way a little bit more, since I had over moved it to get to my zone B. Again, I want to make sure I give myself a little bit of space, so a good 1.5 inches to start, based on kind of how big my roll is going to be right now is going to be plenty. And then I'm going to take my first clamp and I want to put it in the middle. Now I'm ready to put my other clamps on. So I'm going to pull all of this so it's nice and straight. Get that under there. Then I'll do the other side. And just like before, we're going to roll up our excess. Front next. Remember to smooth out your quilt. And as needed, your optional leader. Check that tension and you're ready to continue. Again, anytime I stop, I like to take a few stitches right there in that spot before moving on. One of the things that you do want to check as you start moving this up is your space underneath here. You are going to need to move that as this gets a little bit larger so that the machine can clear that. As you can see, I'm getting towards the end of my quilt. I only have a couple of rows left, so probably about 4 more of my quilting areas, give or take. And you're probably noticing that my roll back here is getting a little big. And this is one of the things that I see questions about all the time is what do you do when your roll gets really big? Now, for me, I'm using an actual long arm machine with the 16. And so I don't have issues with it, you know, running out of space up here. But if you're using a domestic machine, you won't have this much space, right? So you might kind of find like, now it's in the way, it's causing some drag. So there's a couple of things that you can do. One is you can kind of roll this more forward off of the back here so that you have a little bit more space. You can also not roll it as tight. That will limit how much space you have from quilting here, because as you can see, I've lost several inches. Like this is kind of where I was starting. And now this is where I have to start. So that is a tremendous amount, but you know, it's convenient. It's easy to kind of, you know, just take and use a couple more zones if you need to. Another way, and it's actually my favorite way, is to flip my quilt. And this is actually one of the great benefits of a hoop frame is you're not stuck in this is the top and this is the bottom. The top and bottom is really up to you and how you decide to load it. So let's go ahead and take the whole thing off, remove my quilt, and I'm going to flip it upside down so that now my bottom becomes my top. Now, if I don't have a lot of area like I do on this one, then I would go ahead and put my leader back on, okay? But I have plenty of extra here, so I don't have to add the leader. I also love these little mini clips for just holding my quilt while I'm adjusting it, so I don't have to have the full clips on yet until I get to where I want to be. Now you want to consider basting your quilt. Once you take it off and you're flipping it, go ahead and really smooth that out and pin base down here. I think I'll pin base after I get the quilt on. So I'm going to get it in that start position, and then I'm going to do what I did before, which is basically just start putting my clamps back on. Now that I'm basted, I'm ready to get back to doing my design. Now, some designs may be a little bit trickier to do upside down, so I would definitely practice them. If you're doing something like a pantograph, you can always flip your pantograph upside down. And so it'll just be what you were doing before, but from the other side. So it'll come out just fine. But this is just a nice, easy way. Keep your quilting area, keep the excess out, especially with more complicated designs like the borders, and you'll get right back to it with no problems, and you'll get your quilts done in the small footprint that you have. I hope you've enjoyed this video on hoop framing and you've gotten some of the questions you've had about hooping or zone quilting. If not, feel free to throw some of those questions in the comments below this video. If you're wondering what hoop frame is right for you, just contact our sales folks. You can give them a call or email them at sales@graceframe.com. They'll be happy to walk you through and help you pick the one that's going to work best for your budget and your space. In the meantime, I would love to see what you've done. If you already have a hoop frame at home, love to see some of your work from hooping. I'm gonna get back to hooping, but I would love it if you would like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until the next time I see you, I do hope that you sew with love and grace. Bye-bye.